When someone mentions the medieval period, people have wildly different ideas about what years would be considered medieval. For the purpose of this course, we will designate the years 500 to 1500 CE as the medieval period. For those of you unfamiliar with the designation CE, it stands for Common Era and is equivalent to the old AD. The medieval period can be divided into two very distinct linguistic and literary eras. From 500 to roughly 1066, the language that was spoken was Old English, and the literature was strongly influenced by Norse and Germanic heroic tradition. After 1066, the language eventually changed to Middle English, and literature began to be more influenced by the French Romantic tradition. We'll learn more about these changes later in the course. The history of Britain begins with the Romans, simply because they brought with them the ability to write. Before they occupied Britain, it was settled by Celtic tribes who had no written language, and hence we have no history. Julius Caesar tried to bring Britain into the Roman Empire in 55 and 54 BCE, which means before Common Era, but he was unsuccessful. Britain became the furthest outpost of the Roman Empire in 43 CE, when the Celtic tribes were defeated by the forces of the Emperor Claudius. Even then, though, it wasn't a done deal. There were constant uprisings against Roman rule, the largest of which was headed by Queen Boadicea of the Iceni tribe. Iceni is Iceni, in 61 CE. You see, Boadicea's husband had a treaty with the Romans, but when he died suddenly, the Romans wanted to declare the treaty void. This was because of a real culture clash between the Romans and the Celts. Rome was a very patriarchal society that considered women less than human. The Celts, on the other hand, held women in high esteem. They were used to having women leaders in government and in religion, as well as women warriors. The Romans didn't want to deal with a woman, and Boadicea could see no reason that they shouldn't work with her in just the same way that they worked with her husband. When she insisted that the Romans continue to honor their treaty, they decided that they were going to make an example of her by publicly humiliating her and her two daughters in front of the Iceni tribe. Boadicea was stripped to the waist, tied to a pole in the center of town, and publicly flogged. Her two daughters were raped by Roman soldiers in front of the entire community. The Romans thought that this would be the end of it, that no woman would dare to confront them after they learned what had happened to Boadicea. They were, of course, wrong. The Celtic tribes were horrified by the way that the Romans treated their queen and her daughters, and rallied behind her as she led over 100,000 Celtic warriors against the Romans. She and her army killed over 70,000 Romans and Romanized Britons, and actually burned the city of London to the ground. Eventually, Rome's might was brought to bear against her and her army, and they were defeated. But to this day, Boadicea is a hero in England. Her statue stands at the very heart of London. The Romans didn't rule all of Great Britain. The northernmost border of the empire was created by building a wall, known as Hadrian's Wall, across the country to separate Roman territory to the south, right down here, from the undefeated Pictish tribes who lived up at the north in what we would call modern day Scotland. And Pictish is Pictish. And you can still see the wall today. It still exists. It's not like a great big wall like the Great Wall of China, but it certainly is a line of demarcation. In fact, it's been made into a national park in Britain, and you can hike from one end to the other. It's about 75 miles, and so it's kind of a nice way to see this little bit of history. These are forts. Let me see if I can find it right here. These are forts along the wall. And so the Romans occupied these forts, and so they patrolled the wall and kept the people to the south here safe from the incursions of the Picts to the north. And they kept that wall going the entire time that they were in England. That was until about the year 410 CE, which was roughly 370 years after they first arrived. In 410, the city of Rome was attacked by the Visigoths, and the Roman legions were called back from all parts of the empire to save the capital city from being overrun. The soldiers who had occupied Britain left quickly, telling the Celtic tribes remaining that they were going to have to defend themselves, that the Romans wouldn't be there anymore to take care of them. Well, you see, this was a terrible blow to the Celts because they hadn't had to defend themselves for over 3 centuries, and in the meantime had forgotten their warrior skills. Just across the border, though, remember Hadrian's Wall, were those Pictish tribes I mentioned earlier. When the Romans left, the Picts decided that this would be a great time to overrun the wall and attack the rich communities to the south. Unlike those Roman-occupied Celtic tribes, the Picts had not lost their warrior skills. This is, by the way, an artist's version of what the Picts look like. We of course, don't have any Pictish bodies to where we can uh, verify this, but the Romans historians tell us that the Picts had tattoos all over their body, and as you can see here, there was not only male warriors but female warriors too. So anyway, they coming across the wall made things pretty tense for a while for the Celtic tribes who were living to the south. That is until about 40 years later. In 449 CE, one of the Celtic kings who lived just south of the Hadrian's Wall, his name was Vortigern, had an idea. Vortigern remembered that there were tribes of warriors to the east in Denmark and Germany who he might be able to hire to fight against the Picts. He called upon the leaders of the tribes, Hengist and Horsa, to come to England and defend the Celts, who could no longer defend themselves. Warriors came from 3 different tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And all together, these groups were called the Anglo-Saxons, Anglo hyphen Saxons. The plan started out well, but soon backfired when these 3 tribes decided that Britain would be a fine place to live, so they decided to stay. The Angles settled in Northumbria and Mercia, so in this area here. The Saxons settled in the south and west, Wessex, Sussex, that area there. And the Jutes settled in East Anglia and the area of Kent, over on this side of England. So the Celtic peoples who were there before the Anglo-Saxons came in either intermarried with the Anglo-Saxons or they moved west to occupy the western tip of Cornwall or Wales over in this area. So Britain was divided into 7 kingdoms, which came to be known as the Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy. The kingdoms were Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, Sussex, Essex, Kent, and East Anglia. And so you can see that these areas, this Wessex, Sussex, and Essex, these are all areas where the Saxons lived, as you can see from this SEX ending on these place names. Besides the Anglo-Saxons, Britain was undergoing another invasion from 2 different fronts, Christianity from Ireland and from Rome. Columba came from Ireland. This is Columba here. He came from Ireland and established a monastic community on the Isle of Iona in western Scotland. And you can see Iona just right here at the edge of the map. It's Iona. My husband and I were there in 2009, and this is what Columbus Church looks like today. And just as an aside, this is the graveyard on the island. And the island is just made of rock, basically, with a very thin layer of dirt at the top. And so these graves that are on the island that are so shallow that you can actually see the outline of people's bodies in the graves. And Columba and many of the people who first settled with him are buried in this graveyard. So Aidan, this is Saint Aidan here, also from Ireland, went to Lindisfarne, which is Lindisfarne. You see it right here. And that's an island at the eastern end of Hadrian's Wall. Lindisfarne didn't fare as well as Iona over the years. This is basically what it looks like today. This is the monastic community, and this is Lindisfarne Castle out on the hill. But time is eroding away Lindisfarne more than Iona. The monastic community was made of sandstone, and so it's eroding. In the southeast, it was all about St. Augustine, who was sent from Rome to Kent by Pope Gregory the Great, who wanted him to convert the English to Christianity. So these three men, who all later became saints, were instrumental in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons from paganism to Christianity. I would like you to just kind of as a side to note their tonsures. Look at how tonsure is the way that their hair is clipped. And you notice that Columba and Aidan have this, the front of their hair is completely gone. And that Augustine, he has hair in the front, but he has this shaved area up on top. And to me, and to most of us, this seems like just not very of an important thing. But the way of tonsuring, these Columba and Aidan are tonsured in the Irish style, while Augustine is tonsured in the style of Rome. And they had these huge wars later on about what was the correct way to tonsure. And when I say wars, I mean actual battles. Thousands of monks lost their lives in these battles, and eventually the Roman system won. So the early English literature, the earliest ones, things that we have, were all written down by monks working in a monastic community. Stories that were around before the conversion, like Beowulf, were rewritten by these monks to include Christian references. We are going to begin our reading with the story of a monk, Caedmon, and his hymn. Before you move on to Caedmon, though, take a few minutes to look back over your notes and then go to tests and quizzes to complete quiz number 2. You'll find it in the tests and quizzes section, as I said. Oh, and just one more thing, since we have just a minute of time. Would you say that this is an Irish monk or a Roman monk? Give you the Jeopardy theme song. Da 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 da. Yep, it's a Roman monk because you can see that he has the hair in the front and that he has a Roman tonsure. Not that you're ever going to be tested on that, but it's just one of those things that if you're ever on Jeopardy, you might win big money because of it. Okay, now go and take your quiz.